was sharing with you earlier this piece from Nelson Schwartz in today's New York Times. The middle class is steadily eroding. Just ask the business world. Really? And we talked last week about Republican congressional candidate David Jolly, who is, as a Republican, asking to raise the minimum wage because he's sick and tired of you and me subsidizing Walmart to the tune of $1 million a store, subsidizing McDonald's, in a similar fashion, because they pay such low wages that their workers qualify for food stamps and Medicaid and a whole host of government benefits. I suppose there's two ways to deal with that. One is to cut those government benefits, but then those people wouldn't be able to even work at Walmart or live, maybe. And the other is to raise the minimum wage. Peter Schiff is with us. He is the CEO and chief global strategist with Euro Pacific Capital. He's the host of the Peter Schiff Show on the radio, and he's the author of his latest book, The Real Crash: America's Coming Bankruptcy: How to Save Yourself and Your Country. Schiff, SCHIFF radio.com is his website. First of all, why not an increase in the minimum wage?
Well, I mean, it would destroy a lot of jobs. I mean, that's a big problem. We should, get
Can you tell me when that's ever happened in the past?
Well, that's always happened. I mean, why do you think the minimum wage was first created? It was created by labor unions that wanted to price low-skilled workers out of the market by raising the cost of hiring them so that people would have to hire the more expensive, higher-skilled labor. It's always been designed to destroy employment. Yes, it is.
Go back and read your history. The minimum wage was created by FDR on the premise that if your business model is so bad that you can't pay somebody a decent living, you have no right to be in business. Teddy Roosevelt first proposed this. He was a Republican.
Minimum wage didn't start. It was actually Franklin Roosevelt that had the first minimum wage, not Teddy.
I know, but it was Teddy who proposed it.
Yeah, but they didn't think it up. I mean, they had it in Europe before we had it here.
No, they had a maximum wage in Europe.
No, but they had a minimum wage, too. And the minimum wage really didn't apply to the general public. It applied to federal workers in the 30s, but it wasn't until the 1960s that it was broadly applied. But if you look at unemployment rates, particularly among teenagers and young adults, before the minimum wage and now, it's night and day. I mean, you look at black teenagers. You have 40-50% unemployment now. Before the minimum wage, it was very low. In fact,
well, you're also looking at before Reaganomics and now.
White. Excuse me?
You're also looking at before Reaganomics and now. I mean, 33 years of Reaganomics has ripped the guts out of the middle class in this country.
Well, we haven't had Reaganomics for the past 30 years. But
of course we have.
Look,
top tax rate is now 74%.
Let me ask you a question about wages, because wages are prices, right? And when you buy things, do you look for the highest price or the lowest price?
Wages are only partially prices.
No, but it's the price of labor. If I hire somebody, the wages is my price. Plus, it's not just the wages. Of course, it's other payroll costs that the government lumps on top of it. But I have to hire people, and if you take the minimum wage and say, well, if you want to hire somebody, now it's more expensive to hire somebody, particularly people that don't have a lot of skills, where you actually have to train them in addition to pay them. Employers end up hiring fewer people because you raise the cost of hiring, you price people out of the market.
Okay, so I'm running a burger stand here, Peter, and I got one guy doing the fries, I got one guy flipping burgers, I got one person at the counter, and I got one person at the window. And that's fairly typical, and maybe one guy who cleans up and takes out the trash. The minimum wage goes up. Who do I get rid of, and how does that help my business?
Well, it would help your business if the minimum wage didn't go up, but you have to make your own decision as to what works for you, depending on how much the minimum wage goes up. Maybe it'll go up so much that it makes sense to replace your workers with a machine.
Why was it in Portland that when the minimum wage went up that the economy boomed? Why is it that every single time since the 30s the minimum wage has gone up? The subsequent 2 years, 3 years have seen significant increases in GDP.
Well, first of all, there's just because one thing happens and something else happens doesn't mean there's a causal.
Well, you were just arguing correlation is causation.
No, if you look at the countries around the world that have the lowest minimum wage or no minimum wage at all, they have the lowest rates of unemployment. And they
you mean like what, Syria?
No, well, like Switzerland and Singapore, and Hong Kong didn't have one until a couple years ago, but. And, we didn't always have one. Before we
have you ever been to Singapore?
Faster economic growth and less unemployment.
Have you ever been to Singapore?
Yes.
I have too. Do you really want, miles of slums of working people?
Obviously, you weren't there. I mean, they have the highest per capita income in the world in Singapore.
Because they have some very, very wealthy people.
More than the average American. So I don't know what you're talking about.
And in Switzerland, and as in, actually, probably the example you should have used is Sweden, which doesn't have a minimum wage. Because the country is 85% unionized.
Yes, I know.
There's no need for a minimum wage.
Excuse me?
There's no need for a minimum wage. Pretty much everybody's a member of a union.
No, but a lot of people are apprentices, and they don't necessarily earn, the top
right, but we don't have that here in the United States because 33 years of Reaganomics has ripped apart our manufacturing base too.
No, that's not what's ripped apart our manufacturing base.
Yes, it's these insane trade policies that Reagan was promoting.
No, it's not. It has nothing to do with it. It's the high taxes and high regulation that's destroyed our manufacturing.
What was the top income tax rate when Reagan came into office?
It was higher than it is now.
It was 74%.
Yeah, but
what is it now?
You have to realize that the tax code then, I would rather have personally, for my own purpose, I would pay less income taxes right now with a 74% tax rate and the code when Reagan came in than what I'm paying now. I'm actually paying a much higher percentage of my income based on today's code than I would have if Ronald Reagan was president.
Then I would guess you're making less than $600,000 a year.
I'm making a lot more, but the deductions aren't there. But why don't we go back to before the income tax? When the income tax was zero, we had much faster economic growth back then. We didn't have this big gap between the rich and the poor.
The gap between the rich and the poor at the turn of the 19th century was massive, Peter.
No, it's much higher now.
Come on, it provoked a near revolution.